Okay, so let's talk about December 2025. This is when India's biggest airline, IndiGo, a name that was pretty much synonymous with being on time, just completely fell apart. It grounded itself and it took a huge chunk of the country's travel plans down with it. We're going to break down how this all happened.
I mean, you have to ask, what actually happens when the number one airline in a country of over a billion people just stops? This wasn't some thought experiment. For millions of people in India, this became a very real, very stressful reality.
Just think about this number for a second. In a little more than a week, over 4,000 IndiGo flights just poof, disappeared from the schedules. This wasn't just a hiccup or a bad day. We're talking about the single worst operational collapse in the history of Indian aviation. Period. And the human cost? It was huge. You can just imagine the scene, right? Airports across the country absolutely descended into chaos. Thousands of people were stranded. And this all went down during the peak wedding and holiday season, turning what should have been happy moments into total travel nightmares. So, what on earth caused this massive, sudden meltdown? Well, the whole thing started with a new set of safety rules. Rules that, ironically, were designed to make flying safer for everyone. Okay, so it all boils down to these things called FDTL rules. That stands for Flight Duty Time Limitation. Basically, these are government regulations all about preventing pilot fatigue, which, is a really serious risk in aviation. The government was just trying to update them to be in line with the best practices around the world. And these changes were significant. You're talking about more mandatory rest time, limits on night flying, and, this is a big one, slashing the number of night landings a pilot could do per week from 6 down to just 2. Now, these are all great ideas for safety, but they created a brand new problem. You now need a lot more pilots to fly the exact same schedule. So here's the thing. Every single airline in India had to deal with these new rules, but only IndiGo seemed to have this catastrophic reaction, which really begs the question, was this whole crisis just unavoidable, or was it a massive failure to plan? Well, the pilot unions were pretty quick to give their answer. They basically said, "We told you so." They argued this wasn't some random event. It was the direct result of IndiGo's own strategy of keeping a super lean staff to cut costs instead of building in any kind of buffer for their crews. And when you look at the numbers, well, they tell a pretty clear story. After the pandemic, IndiGo went on a shopping spree, adding 91 new aircraft. But look at the pilot hiring. They hired fewer new pilots than their main competitor, Air India, which added fewer planes. It's simple math, really. They had all these new planes, but they just didn't have enough people to fly them under the new safety rules. Okay, so a major planning failure meets a new set of rules. What happens next? Well, things spiraled out of control fast. It became a full-blown national crisis with some really severe consequences for, well, pretty much everyone involved. And it all unraveled with frightening speed. On December 5th, at the peak of the crisis, they canceled something like 1,600 flights in a single day. The chaos got so bad, the government had to step in, and here's the irony. They granted a temporary exemption from the very safety rules that triggered the whole mess. They also had to tap airfares on other airlines to stop price gouging. And if you want to see just how bad it got, look at this. This is staggering. IndiGo built its entire brand on being on time. In October, they were at a totally respectable 84%. By early December, it had plummeted to just 8.5%. Just incredible. The fallout was just massive on every level. The airline lost a mind-boggling 40,000 crore rupees in market value. That's around $5 billion US. They were forced to cut their schedule by 10%. And get this, 4 government flight inspectors were actually fired over the whole thing, which raises some serious questions about oversight, right? And on top of all of that, you have the passengers. To try and manage the public outrage, IndiGo had to shell out over 500 crore rupees. That's more than $60 million in compensation for things like refunds, hotels, and vouchers. But this whole meltdown wasn't just about one airline's very, very bad week. It really pulled back the curtain on some much bigger and frankly, more uncomfortable questions about how the entire Indian aviation market is structured. And this is really the heart of the matter. Look at that market share. With over 60% of the domestic market, IndiGo is just massive. The problem is, when an airline that big fails, there's just nobody else who can pick up the slack.
Their dominance created a systematic risk for the entire country. And people noticed. Big names from across the spectrum started weighing in. They pointed out that the market had become dangerously concentrated, basically an effective duopoly between Indigo and Air India. And they argued that this leaves passengers completely vulnerable when something goes wrong.
So ultimately, the Great Indigo Meltdown leaves us with this really critical question. It's a stark reminder of this very delicate balancing act between a company's efficiency, the safety of passengers, and having enough competition in a market that literally millions of people rely on every single day.